My daughter-in-law whispered, "You'll only stop bringing shame to this family when you die." I smiled and said, "Let's see how you manage without the money I send every month." My son turned to his wife and asked, "What money is she talking about?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Christina's face went white as fresh snow, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw fear in those calculating blue eyes that had looked at me with nothing but disdain since the day she married my David. We were standing in their kitchen, the one with the granite countertops and custom cabinets that I'd helped pay for, though David didn't know that. The Thanksgiving dinner dishes were piled in the sink, and the guests had moved to the living room where football played on the large flat-screen television. Another expense I'd quietly covered. "Mom," David said, setting down the coffee pot he'd been holding. His voice carried that careful tone he used when he sensed trouble brewing. "What are you talking about?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised alone after his father died when David was 12. He was 38 now, with laugh lines around his eyes and gray threading through his brown hair. He worked hard at his sales job, loved his children fiercely, and had always been too trusting for his own good. Christina recovered quickly, as she always did. She smoothed her blonde hair and forced that bright smile she wore like armor. "Barbara's confused, honey. She's been having some moments lately." She tapped her temple with one manicured finger. "Maybe we should talk to her doctor about adjusting her medications." The audacity of it took my breath away. Here she was, trying to gaslight me in my own son's kitchen, suggesting I was losing my mind when she knew perfectly well what money I was talking about. $2,000, transferred from my checking account to hers on the 15th of every month for the past 3 years. "I'm not confused," I said quietly, "and I'm not on any medications that would affect my memory." Tommy and Sarah, my 8- and 6-year-old grandchildren, ran through the kitchen chasing each other, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the tension building between the adults. Sarah bumped against my leg, and I automatically steadied her with a gentle hand. "Grandma, will you read to us later?" Sarah asked, looking up at me with David's same brown eyes. "We'll see, sweetheart," I said, though I wondered if there would be a later, if Christina would find some excuse to cut this visit short like she always did when things didn't go according to her carefully orchestrated plans. Christina watched this exchange with that familiar look of irritation that crossed her face whenever the children showed me affection. She'd been working for months to limit my time with Tommy and Sarah, always finding reasons why visits needed to be postponed or cut short. "Children, go play in the den," she said sharply. "The adults need to talk." After they scampered away, David crossed his arms and looked between his wife and his mother. "Seriously, what money? Mom, are you saying you've been sending us money?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to my banking app. My fingers weren't as steady as they used to be, but they were steady enough to navigate to the transfer history. 3 years' worth of monthly deposits to Christina Morrison. $2,000, I said, turning the screen so David could see. "Every month since October 2020. David's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a growing understanding that made my heart ache for him. He'd been working overtime, missing family dinners and his children's bedtimes, thinking he was barely keeping their heads above water financially. All this time, I'd been quietly supplementing their income, and Christina had let him believe their lifestyle was sustainable on his salary alone. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when he was overwhelmed. "That's $72,000. $72,000 that has paid for Tommy's baseball league, Sarah's dance classes, the private school tuition, the car payments on Christina's SUV, and yes, even this kitchen renovation that she was so proud of last spring." Christina's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand the situation, David. Your mother insisted on helping. She said she wanted to contribute to the family." "I never insisted on anything," I said. "You accepted my offer to help with Tommy's school expenses, and then you kept coming back for more. The dance classes, the sports equipment, the vacation to Disney World last summer, the new furniture for the living room." Each item I listed hit David like a physical blow. I watched him realize how many times Christina had told him they could manage certain expenses, how many times she'd suggested they splurge on something for the children or the house, all while knowing my money was covering the costs. Is this true? He asked Christina. She lifted her chin defiantly. Your mother wanted to help. She said she had more money than she needed, living alone in that little apartment. I was doing her a favor by letting her feel useful. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She'd taken my money for 3 years while simultaneously treating me like an unwelcome burden at every family gathering. The snide comments about my clothes, my hair, my old-fashioned ways, the way she'd roll her eyes when I spoke, or change the subject when I tried to contribute to conversations. A favor, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you whispered to me 10 minutes ago that I'd only stop bringing shame to this family when I die? David's head snapped toward his wife. You said what? She's exaggerating, Christina said quickly. I was frustrated because she spilled gravy on her sweater in front of the Hendersons. It was embarrassing. Embarrassing enough to wish your mother-in-law dead? David's voice was rising now, and I could hear the anger building. Christina's mask was slipping further. I didn't wish anyone dead. I just meant. She stopped, apparently realizing that any explanation would only make things worse. I looked at this woman who had married my son, who had given me 2 beautiful grandchildren, who had smiled at me across countless dinner tables while secretly calculating how to use my generosity against me. She was 29 years old, beautiful, ambitious, and completely without conscience when it came to getting what she wanted. The money stops now, I said simply. The transfers I set up will be canceled tomorrow morning. Mom, wait, David said. Let's talk about this. If you've been helping us, I need to understand why and how we can— No discussion, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Christina made her feelings about my place in this family very clear. She can figure out how to pay for her lifestyle without my help. I walked past them both, heading toward the living room to say goodbye to Tommy and Sarah. Behind me, I could hear Christina's voice, higher and more desperate now. David, you can't let her do this. The kids' school, the house payment. Everything is budgeted around money we didn't know we were getting? David's voice was cold. Money my wife has been taking from my mother while treating her like garbage. I found my grandchildren in the living room, building a fort out of couch cushions. They looked up at me with bright, innocent faces, unaware that their world was about to change dramatically. Grandma has to go now, I said, kneeling down to hug them both. But you just got here, Tommy protested. I know, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups have things they need to figure out. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear the argument escalating in the kitchen. Christina's voice was shrill now, all pretense of sweetness gone. David's responses were getting shorter and angrier. I stepped out into the cool November air and took my first deep breath in hours. For 3 years, I'd been enabling Christina's cruelty by funding her lifestyle. I'd thought I was helping my son and grandchildren, but instead I'd been allowing myself to be used and abused by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with inconvenient emotions attached. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. Mom, please don't leave like this. We need to talk. But I was already in my car, driving away from the house I'd helped pay for, toward my small apartment where I could finally think clearly about what came next. The money had been my secret weapon, the thing I thought made me indispensable to their lives. Now I realized it had been my prison, keeping me trapped in a relationship built on financial dependency rather than love or respect. Tomorrow, I would cancel the automatic transfers. Tomorrow, Christina would learn what it meant to manage without the money she'd grown to depend on while despising the woman who provided it. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something that might have been hope. The phone started ringing at 7 the next morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee and the morning paper, something I hadn't been able to enjoy in peace for months. Christina had a habit of calling early on weekends with some emergency that required my immediate financial attention. A school event that needed funding, a household repair that couldn't wait, some opportunity for the children that would slip away if I didn't act immediately. This time, I let it ring. The calls kept coming. Christina's number, then David's, then Christina again. By 9 o'clock, there had been 12 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Christina's first message was predictably manipulative. Barbara, I think there was a misunderstanding yesterday. Can we talk? Her second was more desperate. The kids are asking why Grandma left so upset. Please call back. By the 5th message, the mask had completely slipped. You can't just cut off our family like this. David is furious with me and it's all your fault. I set the phone aside and finished reading the newspaper. For the first time in years, I actually absorbed the words on the page instead of scanning them anxiously while waiting for the next demand on my attention. At 10 o'clock, David's truck pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. I watched from my window as he sat behind the wheel for several minutes, his head in his hands. When he finally got out, his movements were those of a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Come in," I said. "I'll make fresh coffee." We sat across from each other at my small dining table, the same table where I'd done his homework with him 25 years ago. He held his coffee cup with both hands, staring into it like it might hold answers. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I swear to you, Mom, I had no idea you were sending us money." "I believe you," I said, and I did. David had always been transparent to a fault. He couldn't lie convincingly if his life depended on it, but I should have known. I should have questioned how we were managing to afford everything. Christina always said she was good with money, that she'd figured out ways to stretch our budget, but now. He trailed off, running his hands through his hair again. "Now you're realizing the numbers never added up," I finished for him. "The private school alone is $1,200 a month. My salary, after taxes and insurance, barely covers our mortgage and car payments. But Christina always seemed to have money for extras. Dance classes, sports equipment, clothes for the kids, dinners out." He looked up at me with eyes full of guilt. "How could I be so stupid? You trusted your wife. That's not stupid, David. That's what marriage is supposed to be. But the way she treated you." He shook his head. "I saw it, Mom. I saw how she'd dismiss what you said, how she'd make little comments about your appearance or your opinions. I told myself it was just personality differences, that you two would work it out eventually." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "Christina is very good at what she does. She made it seem like her behavior was normal, like I was the problem." "Tell me everything," he said. "I need to understand how this started, how it got so bad without me noticing." So I told him. I started with the phone call 3 years ago, just after Christina had mentioned how worried they were about affording Tommy's school. I'd offered to help with the tuition, just for a few months while David's commission picked up. "She was so grateful at first," I said. "She cried, said what a blessing I was to the family. She suggested I send the money directly to her account so you wouldn't feel embarrassed about accepting help." David winced, and I never saw it because she managed all our finances. The tuition became tuition plus supplies, then supplies plus Tommy's baseball registration, then Sarah's dance classes were added. Christina would call me with these urgent requests, always framed as necessities for the children's well-being. I got up and retrieved a folder from my kitchen counter. Inside were printouts of every text conversation, every email, every request Christina had made over the past 3 years. David read through them with growing horror. There were requests for money for emergency car repairs that turned out to be upgrades, school supplies that cost hundreds of dollars, birthday parties that required elaborate decorations and entertainment. Each request came with emotional manipulation about the children's happiness or social standing. "She told me you offered all of this," David said, holding up a text from Christina describing how I'd insisted on paying for their Disney World vacation. "I offered to help with Tommy's school tuition, everything else she asked for. And she never told me about any of it. She told me you'd be too proud to accept help, that it would embarrass you if you knew. She made me promise to keep it secret." David set the papers down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of rage and heartbreak that made my chest tight. "She used your love for us against you," he said. "She took your generosity and twisted it into some kind of arrangement where you paid her to abuse you." "That's a harsh way to put it." "Is it? She took your money while making you feel like you weren't welcome in our home. She let you think you were imposing when you came to family dinners. She criticized everything about you while using your financial support to pay for the lifestyle she was so proud of. I couldn't argue with that assessment because it was exactly what had happened. For 3 years, I'd been funding my own humiliation." "What did she say when you got home last night?" I asked. David's jaw tightened. She tried to convince me that you were manipulating the situation, that you'd been secretly controlling our family through money, and now you were angry because we weren't grateful enough. Do you believe that? I believed it for about 5 minutes, he said, until I started thinking about every family gathering, every holiday, every time you tried to spend time with Tommy and Sarah, and Christina found reasons to cut it short. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text message from Christina. Your mother is trying to destroy our marriage because she's jealous of what we've built together. What we've built, I repeated, with my money. I've asked her to stay at her sister's for a few days while I figure things out. I can't even look at her right now. My heart ached for him. Whatever Christina's faults, she was still his wife, the mother of his children. Their marriage might survive this revelation, but it would never be the same. David, I need you to understand something, I said. The money stops now. Not because I want to hurt you or the children, but because the arrangement was toxic. It enabled Christina to treat me terribly while taking away your agency as a husband and father. I know, he said, and I don't want your money anymore. I need to figure out how to support my own family. It's going to be difficult. You'll probably have to take the kids out of private school, give up some of the activities, maybe downsize the house. Good, he said, and there was steel in his voice now. Maybe it's time we learn to live within our means instead of living off your generosity while my wife treats you like garbage. I squeezed his hand. The children will be fine. They're resilient. I'm worried about you, though. Are you okay? Really okay? I considered the question. Was I okay? I felt hollow, exhausted by 3 years of walking on eggshells and funding my own mistreatment. But underneath the hurt, there was something else. Relief, maybe, or the first stirrings of self-respect. I will be, I said. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. We talked for another hour about practical things, how David would adjust their budget, what he'd tell the children, whether he thought his marriage could be salvaged. I listened and offered support, but I was careful not to give advice. This was his life to rebuild. As he was leaving, David hugged me tighter than he had in years. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. I'm so sorry I let this happen to you. You didn't let anything happen. Christina made choices and so did I. Now we all have to live with the consequences. After he left, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, processing what felt like the end of one chapter of my life and the uncertain beginning of another. My phone buzzed with another text from Christina, but this time I didn't even read it. Instead, I deleted her number from my contacts and blocked her calls. For the first time in 3 years, the silence felt like freedom. The week that followed was the quietest I'd experienced in 3 years. No morning calls demanding money for school fundraisers, no afternoon emergencies requiring immediate financial intervention, no evening guilt trips disguised as family updates. For the first time since Christina had entered our lives, my phone stayed silent, and I discovered what peace sounded like. I used the time to think, really think, about how I'd allowed myself to become an ATM with emotions attached. The pattern had been so gradual, so expertly orchestrated, that I'd barely noticed as my role in the family shifted from beloved grandmother to secret benefactor. On Wednesday, I drove to Tommy's school to watch his baseball practice. I'd been paying for his equipment, his team fees, his private coaching sessions. But Christina had made sure I rarely got to see him actually play. Always so many conflicting schedules, she'd say with false regret. Maybe next time, but there was no Christina to manage my schedule now. I sat in the bleachers with other grandparents, watching my grandson pitch with the confidence that came from 3 years of expensive coaching I'd funded in secret. Your Tommy's got quite an arm, said the woman sitting next to me. She introduced herself as Mrs. Rodriguez, grandmother to one of Tommy's teammates. Thank you, I said, and realized it was the first time I'd been able to openly claim pride in my grandson's accomplishments without Christina's disapproving presence. Are you coming to the pizza party after the game on Saturday? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. The whole team goes to Marco's after home games. I had no idea there were pizza parties. I'd been paying for Tommy's participation in the team, but had been excluded from the social aspects that came with it. I'm not sure, I said honestly. Well, you should come. Tommy always looks for you in the stands. He mentions his grandma Barbara quite a bit. My heart swelled. Despite Christina's efforts to minimize my presence in his life, Tommy still thought about me, still wanted me there. When practice ended, Tommy ran over to the fence where I was standing. His face lit up when he saw me. "Grandma, did you see my strikeout?" "I saw everything," I said. "You were wonderful. Are you coming to the pizza party on Saturday? Mom says maybe you're too busy, but I really want you to come." Of course, Christina had already started making excuses for my absence. She was probably planning to attend the party herself, basking in the praise for Tommy's skills that my money had helped develop. I wouldn't miss it, I told him. That evening, David called. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected. How are you managing?" There was a long pause. It's been eye-opening. I sat down with our finances last night, really went through everything for the first time in years. Christina always handled the bills, said she was better with numbers. Now I understand why she didn't want me looking too closely. What did you find? We're in debt up to our eyeballs. Credit cards I didn't know existed, loans against my 401k, a second mortgage on the house that I apparently signed but don't remember signing. Your monthly support wasn't supplementing our lifestyle, Mom. It was the only thing keeping us from bankruptcy. The magnitude of Christina's deception was staggering. She hadn't just been taking my money to fund extras. She'd been using it to cover essential expenses while hiding their true financial situation from David. "How much debt?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. $87,000, not counting the mortgages. I felt sick. My son, who'd always been responsible with money, had been manipulated into a financial hole so deep it would take years to climb out. "Christina did all this without you knowing? She'd bring me papers to sign, always when I was distracted or tired. She'd say they were refinancing documents or insurance updates. I trusted her, so I signed." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I've been living in a fantasy for 3 years, thinking we were successful when really we were drowning. What will you do now? I've got an appointment with a bankruptcy attorney tomorrow, and a divorce lawyer on Friday." The finality in his voice told me he'd made his decision about his marriage. I felt sad for the children, but relieved that David was finally seeing Christina clearly. "How are Tommy and Sarah handling all this?" "They know something's wrong. Tommy asked me yesterday why Mommy's been crying all the time. Sarah keeps asking when you're coming over again." "I'm coming to Tommy's pizza party on Saturday. Will that be okay?" "Of course. Actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. Christina called me this afternoon, furious that you'd shown up at Tommy's practice. She said you were trying to poison the other parents against her. I barely spoke to anyone. I just watched Tommy play baseball." "I know, but Christina sees threats everywhere now. She's convinced you're orchestrating some kind of campaign to destroy her reputation." The irony was rich. Christina had spent 3 years systematically destroying my reputation within the family, making me seem like an intrusive, difficult woman who couldn't take a hint. Now she was paranoid that I might be doing the same to her. "I'm not interested in destroying anyone," I said. "I just want to be part of my grandchildren's lives without having to pay for the privilege." I told her you have every right to attend Tommy's games and school events. If she doesn't like it, she can stay home. For the first time in our conversation, I heard anger in David's voice. Real anger, not the frustrated confusion that had characterized his tone all week. "She threatened to keep the kids away from you if you don't start sending money again," he continued. "She can't do that. You're their father. She can't do it legally, but she can make it difficult. She's already telling them stories about how you're angry with Mommy, and that's why you can't come over anymore." I closed my eyes. Even now, even with her world crumbling around her, Christina was trying to manipulate the situation through the children. "What kind of stories?" "Sarah asked me yesterday if you were mad at her. She thought maybe she'd done something wrong and that's why Grandma didn't want to see her anymore." My heart broke. My sweet 6-year-old granddaughter was blaming herself for the adult chaos swirling around her. "I'll talk to her on Saturday," I said. "I'll make sure she understands that none of this is her fault." "Christina's not planning to be at the pizza party. She said she can't face the other parents right now. I think word is getting around about our situation. Small towns had a way of making private business public. If David was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys, people would notice. If Christina had been bragging about their lifestyle to other parents, those same people would be wondering how a sales manager could afford private school and expensive activities. Are you okay with me being there without her?" "Mom, you don't need her permission to be part of your grandchildren's lives. You never did." I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that. After we hung up, I sat on my couch thinking about Saturday's pizza party. For 3 years, I'd been excluded from these normal family moments while my money funded them. Now I'd be there as myself, not as a secret benefactor whose presence was barely tolerated. I thought about Christina at her sister's house, probably spinning an elaborate story about how she was the victim in all this, how her manipulative mother-in-law had used money to control their family and was now punishing them for not being grateful enough. But I also thought about Tommy's face when he saw me at practice, the genuine joy and excitement. I thought about Sarah asking David if she'd done something wrong. I thought about all the moments I'd missed because Christina had convinced me that my presence was unwelcome while my money was essential. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Ruth in Phoenix. "Barbara," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "I was just thinking about you. How are David and the kids?" For 3 years, I'd given Ruth sanitized versions of family gatherings, editing out Christina's cruelties and my own growing unhappiness. I'd been too ashamed to admit how I was being treated, too afraid that speaking the truth out loud would make it real. This time, I told her everything. Ruth listened without interrupting as I described the secret money transfers, Christina's escalating demands, the whispered cruelty that had finally broken something inside me. "My God, Barbara," she said when I finished, "why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I kept thinking it would get better, that once Christina felt more secure in the family, she'd warm up to me. I thought if I just helped enough, gave enough, proved my love for Tommy and Sarah, she'd eventually accept me. Honey, that woman was never going to accept you. You were a threat to her control over David and the children. The money just gave her a way to use you while keeping you at arm's length. Ruth was right, of course. Christina had never intended for our relationship to improve. She'd found the perfect arrangement. Unlimited financial support from a woman who could be easily dismissed and excluded. "What happens now?" Ruth asked. "Now I learn who I am when I'm not trying to buy my place in someone else's life," I said. And for the first time in 3 years, that prospect didn't terrify me. It felt like possibility. Saturday's pizza party was a revelation. I arrived at Marco's Pizza 15 minutes early, nervous about navigating a social situation without Christina's controlling presence. For 3 years, she'd managed every interaction I had with other parents, either by excluding me entirely or by hovering nearby, ready to interrupt if I said anything that didn't fit her carefully constructed narrative. But as I walked into the noisy restaurant filled with children in baseball uniforms and their families, something unexpected happened. Several parents immediately came over to greet me. "Barbara, so wonderful to see you here," said Jennifer Martinez, whose son played catcher. "Tommy talks about his grandma all the time. We've been wondering when we'd finally get to meet you. Christina always said you were too busy to come to team events," added Mike Peterson, father of the shortstop. "But Tommy made it sound like you never missed anything important in his life." I felt a flush of warmth and pain simultaneously. Tommy had been talking about me, making me sound like an involved grandmother, while Christina had been telling everyone I was too busy or uninterested to participate. "I've been looking forward to this," I said, and meant it. Tommy spotted me from across the restaurant and came running over, still in his grass-stained uniform from the game. "Grandma, did you see my home run? Did you see it?" "I saw everything," I said, hugging him tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Sarah appeared at my side, taking my hand with the casual possessiveness that children have with people they love. "Grandma, will you sit with us? I saved you a seat." As we made our way to the long table where the team was gathering, I caught fragments of conversation from other families. Normal talk about carpools and practice schedules and summer plans. The kind of community involvement I'd been paying for but never experiencing. "Barbara," called out Susan Chen, whose daughter Emily was Sarah's age and also took dance classes. "I keep meaning to ask you, is Sarah continuing with ballet this summer? Emily's been asking if they'll be in the same class again." I realized I had no idea what Sarah's summer plans were. For 3 years, I'd been funding activities without being included in the planning. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "I'll have to check with David." "Oh, I assumed you'd be involved in the decision since you're so supportive of her dancing," Susan said. "The studio coordinator mentioned what a generous grandmother you are." Heat flooded my cheeks. Christina had apparently been taking credit for my financial support while simultaneously excluding me from any actual involvement in Sarah's activities. David arrived just then, looking tired but relieved to see me. He sat down beside Tommy and accepted the chaos of children arguing over pizza toppings and trading baseball cards. "How was the game?" I asked him. "Good. Tommy pitched 3 innings and struck out 5 batters. His coach says he's got real potential." "The coach Christina hired last year is excellent," Jennifer Martinez said. "Expensive, but worth every penny. Your mother must be proud to see Tommy improving so much." David's face went very still. "What do you mean?" "Well, the private coaching sessions. Tommy mentioned his grandma was helping with those. It's so wonderful when families can support children's interests that way." I watched David process this information. Another expense I'd been covering that he hadn't known about. Another lie Christina had told to explain how they could afford luxuries on his salary. "Yes," David said carefully. "My mother has always been very generous with the children." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed David becoming quieter, more withdrawn. I could practically see him calculating, trying to figure out how many other expenses I'd been secretly covering. After an hour, parents started collecting their children and heading home. David helped Tommy and Sarah gather their things, then walked me to my car. "Private coaching," he said without preamble. 2 sessions a week since last spring. Christina said it was important for Tommy's development. "How much?" $150 a week. David leaned against my car and closed his eyes. "That's almost $8,000. David, I wanted to help. I saw how much joy baseball brought Tommy, and it's not your fault, Mom. None of this is your fault." He opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Christina's been living a lie for 3 years, and she's been forcing all of us to live it with her." "What do you mean?" "She's been telling everyone that we're financially stable, that she's a great money manager, that our lifestyle is sustainable. Meanwhile, she's been funding it all with your money and credit we can't afford. Do you know what she told the private school when I tried to withdraw Tommy and Sarah this week?" I shook my head. "She told them there had been a misunderstanding, that the tuition was covered by a trust fund you'd established for the children's education. She tried to keep them enrolled without asking me." The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, facing the collapse of her carefully constructed fantasy, Christina was still lying, still trying to maintain the illusion. "What did you do?" I went to the school myself and explained the situation. "The kids will finish out this semester, but they'll be enrolling in public school for the fall." "How are they handling that?" "Better than I expected. Sarah's actually excited about riding the school bus. Tommy's worried about leaving his friends, but I told him he can still play baseball with the same community league." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other families load into their cars. Normal families dealing with normal problems, not the elaborate financial deceptions we'd been living with. "There's something else," David said. "Christina came by the house yesterday while I was at work. The neighbor saw her loading things into her car." "What kind of things?" "Jewelry, small appliances, some of the expensive items from the house. I think she's planning to sell them. Or maybe she's just taking what belongs to her." David shook his head. "I bought most of that jewelry for anniversaries and birthdays when I thought we could afford it. Now I realize it was all purchased with your money. She's essentially stealing from you to fund whatever she's planning to do next." I felt a familiar stab of pain, not for the material items, but for what they represented. How thoroughly Christina had invaded every aspect of our family's life, turning gifts of love into tools of manipulation. "Are you going to try to stop her? What's the point? Let her have the jewelry. Let her sell whatever she can. It's not going to solve her problems, and I'm done trying to manage her behavior." There was something different about David's voice, a finality I hadn't heard before. He'd moved past anger into something that looked like acceptance. "The divorce papers are being filed Monday," he said. "My lawyer says it should be straightforward since we don't have any real assets to fight over." "And custody?" "I'm asking for primary custody with supervised visitation for Christina. My lawyer thinks it's reasonable given the financial deception and the debt she's created." I thought about my grandchildren, innocent casualties in their parents' failed marriage. "How much have you told Tommy and Sarah?" "Just that Mommy and Daddy are having problems and need some time apart." They're staying with me, and that's all they need to know for now. They're going to have questions. I know, but I'd rather answer their questions honestly than keep living in Christina's fantasy world. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the content made it clear who was texting. This is all your fault. You destroyed our family because you couldn't stand to see David happy with someone else. I hope you're satisfied. I showed the message to David. His jaw tightened as he read it. She's using a different phone. Probably borrowed it from someone so she could get around the fact that you blocked her. Another message came through. You think cutting off the money will hurt me, but it's only hurting Tommy and Sarah. They'll never forgive you for taking away their school and their activities. She's trying to make you feel guilty, David said. Don't let her. But a third message was already appearing. I know what kind of person you really are. Selfish, bitter, jealous of what younger women can offer. No wonder your husband died to get away from you. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Christina had found the one thing guaranteed to cause maximum pain, bringing my late husband into her campaign of emotional warfare. David read the message over my shoulder, and I felt him go rigid with fury. Give me the phone, he said. David, don't. But he was already typing. This is David. If you contact my mother again with threats or insults, I will file a restraining order. Leave her alone. You've done enough damage. He handed the phone back to me and pulled me into a hug. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry you had to read that. She's in pain, I said, though the words felt hollow. People say things they don't mean when they're desperate. No, Mom. Christina means exactly what she said. That message is who she really is when the mask comes off. Standing in that parking lot, holding my son while children's laughter echoed from inside the restaurant, I realized David was right. The woman who had whispered about me bringing shame to the family, who had taken my money while excluding me from my grandchildren's lives, who could text such cruelty about my dead husband, was not someone who deserved my empathy or forgiveness. She was simply someone I needed to protect myself from. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt strong enough to do exactly that. 3 weeks after the pizza party, I was sitting in my apartment reading when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw David standing there with Tommy and Sarah, both children carrying small overnight bags. Hi, Mom, David said when I opened the door. His face looked lighter than it had in weeks. We were wondering if you'd like some company for the weekend. It had been 3 years since my grandchildren had stayed overnight at my apartment. Christina had always found reasons why it wasn't convenient, wasn't safe, wasn't appropriate. The apartment was too small, the neighborhood too busy, my schedule too unpredictable. Of course, I said, stepping aside to let them in. But won't Christina object? Christina's in Tampa with her sister, David said. And even if she weren't, what she objects to isn't my concern anymore. Tommy immediately headed for my bookshelf, where I kept a collection of children's books from David's childhood. Sarah made herself at home on my couch, arranging her stuffed animals with the serious concentration that 6-year-olds bring to important tasks. Are you sure you want them for the whole weekend? David asked. I can pick them up tomorrow if it's too much. It's not too much, I said, and realized I meant it. For months, I'd been so focused on the financial aspects of my relationship with the children that I'd forgotten the simple joy of their company. After David left, Tommy and Sarah helped me make dinner. We had spaghetti with meat sauce, nothing fancy, but they treated it like a feast. Sarah insisted on setting the table with my good dishes, the ones I rarely used anymore. Grandma, Tommy said as we were eating, why doesn't Mommy live with us anymore? It was the question I'd been dreading. David had given me permission to answer their questions honestly, but how do you explain financial deception and emotional manipulation to children? Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that hurt other people, I said carefully. Your daddy and mommy are trying to figure out how to fix some problems, but it's going to take time. Is it because of money? Sarah asked with the startling perceptiveness that children sometimes display. Partly, I said, but mostly it's because people weren't being honest with each other. Mommy said you were mean to her, Tommy said. She said that's why you don't come to our house anymore. My chest tightened. Even now, Christina was trying to poison the children against me. What do you think? I asked. Do I seem mean to you? Tommy considered this seriously. No, you're not mean. You make me cookies and read me stories, and you came to my baseball game even when it was raining. Mommy cries a lot now, Sarah said matter-of-factly. She says it's because Daddy and Grandma don't want her to be part of our family anymore. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Sarah, honey, your mommy is sad because things are changing, and change is hard for everyone. But you and Tommy don't need to worry about grown-up problems. Your job is just to be kids. Are you sad too, Grandma? I looked at my granddaughter's earnest face and decided to tell her a version of the truth. I was sad for a while, but I'm feeling much better now. That night, after I'd tucked them into bed in my spare room, I sat alone in my living room thinking about Christina's continuing manipulation. She was using the children as weapons, trying to make them feel responsible for the family's problems while painting herself as the victim. But Tommy and Sarah seemed remarkably resilient. They were adapting to their new normal with the flexibility that children possess, finding joy in simple things like helping make dinner and sleeping at Grandma's house. The next morning, we went to the farmer's market. It was something I'd wanted to do with them for years, but Christina had always found reasons why it wouldn't work. Too crowded, too early, too unpredictable. The children loved it. Tommy was fascinated by the man who made fresh pasta, watching him feed dough through an ancient machine. Sarah made friends with a woman who sold handmade soaps, learning about the different scents and textures. "Can we get flowers for the apartment?" Sarah asked at the flower stand. "Of course," I said, letting her pick out a bouquet of sunflowers that was almost as tall as she was. As we walked through the market, I noticed other families doing the same thing we were doing, grandparents and children exploring together. No rush, no agenda beyond enjoying each other's company. This was what I'd been missing while I was busy funding Christina's version of family life. We ran into Susan Chen from the baseball team, who was there with her daughter Emily. "Barbara, how nice to see you." "Hi, Tommy." "Hi, Sarah." The children waved shyly, then Emily asked if they wanted to see the baby goats at the petting zoo setup. As the three children ran off together, Susan and I found ourselves alone. "I hope you don't mind me asking," Susan said, "but how are things going with the family situation?" Emily mentioned that Tommy's parents are separated. I'd been dreading questions like this, but Susan's tone was kind, not gossipy. "It's been challenging," I said, "but the children are doing well." "Kids are so adaptable," Susan said. "Emily went through something similar when her father and I divorced 5 years ago. The hardest part was not letting her see how angry I was with her father." "How did you manage that?" I reminded myself that my feelings about him were separate from his relationship with her. No matter what he'd done to me, he was still her father, and she needed that relationship to stay positive. It was good advice, though my situation was more complicated. Christina wasn't just an ex-spouse. She was someone who had systematically manipulated and used me while poisoning my relationship with my grandchildren. The thing that surprised me, Susan continued, was how much better Emily and I got along once the conflict in the house was gone. We could just enjoy each other without all the tension. That evening, after David picked up the children, I reflected on Susan's words. The weekend had been peaceful in a way that family time hadn't been for 3 years. No walking on eggshells, no careful monitoring of conversations to avoid Christina's disapproval, no underlying tension about money or expectations. Just a grandmother and her grandchildren, making dinner and going to the farmer's market and reading bedtime stories. On Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my friend Helen, whom I'd been neglecting while I was busy managing Christina's financial demands. "Barbara, where have you been hiding? I've left you 3 messages in the past month." I had been hiding, I realized, isolating myself from friendships that might have offered perspective on my family situation. "I'm sorry, Helen. I've been dealing with some family issues, but I think things are settling down now." "Well, I'm glad to hear it. Listen, there's a book club starting at the community center. First meeting is Thursday evening. Want to come with me?" For 3 years, I'd turned down social invitations because I was always on call for Christina's emergencies. There was always some crisis that required my immediate attention, some urgent expense that couldn't wait. "I'd love to," I said, and meant it. "Wonderful. And Barbara, you sound different, lighter somehow." Lighter. That was exactly how I felt. As if a weight I'd been carrying for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from David's divorce attorney. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Janet Webb. David asked me to contact you about the financial aspects of his divorce proceedings. What can I help you with? We're documenting the family's financial history, and David mentioned that you'd been providing substantial support. Would you be willing to provide records of the payments you made? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect Christina, even now, but a larger part recognized that the truth needed to come out. Yes, I said. I have detailed records. The reason I'm asking is that Christina is claiming she should receive alimony based on the lifestyle she's accustomed to. If that lifestyle was funded by your contributions rather than David's income, it changes the calculation significantly. I spent an hour that evening organizing bank statements, receipts, and documentation of every payment I'd made over 3 years. The total was even higher than I'd thought, nearly $85,000 when I included all the miscellaneous expenses Christina had requested. As I compiled the evidence of my financial support, I felt something shifting inside me. For months, I'd been ashamed of how I'd been treated, as if being manipulated was somehow my fault. But looking at the documentation, I saw something different. I saw 3 years of love, misguided perhaps, certainly taken advantage of, but love nonetheless. Every payment had been motivated by my desire to help my son and grandchildren, to make their lives easier and happier. Christina had twisted that love into something ugly, but the love itself had been real and pure. And now, finally, I was learning to direct that love in healthier ways. Instead of trying to buy my place in the family, I was simply showing up, being present, offering my time and attention rather than my wallet. The woman who had whispered cruel words about bringing shame to the family was about to discover that the family was much stronger without her toxic influence. And I was much stronger than I'd ever imagined. 6 months later, I was in my kitchen making Christmas cookies with Sarah, when she looked up at me with flour on her nose and said, "Grandma, are you happier now?" The question caught me off guard, but the answer came without hesitation. "Yes, sweetheart, much happier." "Good," she said, returning to her careful work decorating a sugar cookie shaped like a star, "because you smile more now. Before, when Mommy lived with us, you looked worried all the time, out of the mouths of babes." Sarah had seen what I'd tried so hard to hide from myself, that I'd been living in a constant state of anxiety for 3 years, always waiting for the next financial demand, the next subtle insult, the next reminder that my presence was tolerated only because of what I could provide. The divorce had been finalized in October. Christina received no alimony once my financial contributions were documented. The judge had been particularly unimpressed with her claim that she deserved ongoing support based on a lifestyle funded by money she'd essentially stolen from her former mother-in-law. David now had primary custody of the children, with Christina getting supervised visits every other weekend. She'd moved back to her hometown in Georgia, where she was reportedly working at her brother's insurance office and living with her parents. The children missed her, of course. Tommy still asked when Mommy was coming home, and Sarah sometimes cried for her at bedtime, but they were adapting with the remarkable resilience that children possess, and more importantly, they were no longer living in a house filled with financial stress and emotional manipulation. David had filed for bankruptcy and was slowly rebuilding his credit. He'd moved to a smaller apartment, enrolled the children in public school, and taken on a second job on weekends. It was hard work, but he told me he slept better at night, knowing exactly where he stood financially. "No more secrets," he'd said. "No more living beyond our means. If we can't afford something, we don't buy it." The change in him was remarkable. The constant worry that had lined his face for years was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from taking control of his own life. As for me, I was discovering who I was when I wasn't trying to buy love or approval. I'd joined Helen's book club, which led to volunteering at the library's literacy program. I was teaching adults to read, work that used my old teaching skills, and gave me a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with writing checks. I'd also started taking watercolor classes at the community center. It was something I'd always wanted to try, but never had time for when I was constantly managing Christina's emergencies. "You're really talented," my instructor had said last week, looking at my painting of the view from my apartment window. "Have you ever thought about entering a show?" I hadn't, but the idea excited me. When was the last time I'd felt excited about my own accomplishments rather than someone else's achievements that I'd secretly funded? Tommy and Sarah spent every other weekend with me now, plus one evening during the week. We had established routines. Saturday morning farmer's market, Sunday afternoon at the park, Wednesday evening homework help followed by dinner and a movie. Christina had initially tried to interfere with these arrangements, calling to tell the children about activities they were missing because they were spending time with me. But David had put a stop to that quickly. The kids need stability, he'd told her. They need to know that their time with mom is their time, without guilt trips about what else they could be doing. The supervised visits weren't going well, from what I could gather. Christina seemed unable to simply spend time with her children without trying to pump them for information about David and me, or making them feel guilty about her circumstances. She keeps asking if Daddy talks about her, Tommy had confided to me during one of our Wednesday dinners. And she cries a lot. That must be hard for you to see, I'd said. It is. I wish she could just play games with us or read stories like you do. It broke my heart that Christina couldn't see what she was doing to her own children, how her need to control and manipulate was poisoning even these limited interactions. But it also reinforced my decision to maintain strict boundaries. Christina had reached out to me twice since the divorce, both times with elaborate apologies and requests to rebuild our relationship for the children's sake. I'd politely but firmly declined both times. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. The trust was gone, and without trust, there could be no relationship. David supported this decision completely. She had 3 years to treat you with basic decency, he'd said. She chose cruelty instead. You don't owe her a fourth chance. The book club was reading Wild by Cheryl Strayed, and something the author had written resonated deeply with me. How wild it was to let it be. For most of my adult life, I'd tried to fix things, smooth things over, make things work through sheer force of will and generosity. With Christina, I'd tried to buy acceptance, to earn love through financial support. But sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply let things be what they are. Let difficult people face the consequences of their choices. Let relationships end when they become toxic. Let yourself walk away from situations that diminish you. Christmas morning arrived with snow falling softly outside my windows. Tommy and Sarah were staying with me for the weekend, while David worked a seasonal retail job to earn extra money for their new life. We made pancakes shaped like snowmen and opened presents in my living room. Nothing expensive, just simple gifts chosen with care. Books for both children, art supplies for Sarah, a baseball glove for Tommy that I'd found at a secondhand sports store. This is the best Christmas ever, Sarah announced, cuddling with a stuffed elephant I'd given her. Better than when we lived in the big house? I asked, genuinely curious. Tommy considered this seriously. Different, he said finally. Before, there were lots of presents, but everyone was always fighting. Now there aren't as many presents, but everyone's happy. Wise words from an 8-year-old. That afternoon, as the children napped and I sat reading by my tree, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Christina's number. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me, and I listened to the message. Barbara, it's Christina. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but it's Christmas, and I wanted to. I wanted to apologize, really apologize. Not for what I want from you, but for how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. I was scared and desperate, and I took it out on you, and I'm sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. I hope you're happy. I hope the kids know how lucky they are to have you. It was the first time Christina had ever apologized without asking for something in return, the first time she'd acknowledged my worth without it being connected to money. But it was too little, too late. I deleted the message and put the phone away. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't require reconciliation. I could forgive Christina for my own peace of mind, while still maintaining the boundaries that protected my well-being. As the sun set on Christmas Day, painting my small apartment in golden light, I looked at my life with clear eyes. I was 65 years old, living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment, with a small savings account that was no longer being drained by someone else's demands. I was volunteering my time to help others learn to read. I was painting watercolors that might never hang in a gallery, but gave me joy to create. I was spending genuine time with my grandchildren, time based on love rather than financial obligation. 3 years ago, I'd thought my value lay in what I could provide for others, how much I could give, how many problems I could solve with my checkbook. Now I knew better. My value lay in who I was. A woman with stories to tell and wisdom to share, with hands that could teach a child to read and eyes that could find beauty in everyday moments. The woman who had once whispered that I'd only stop bringing shame to the family when I died had been wrong about everything. I wasn't a source of shame. I was a source of strength. I wasn't a burden to be endured. I was a gift to be treasured. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. I had my son, who had finally learned to see me clearly. I had my grandchildren, who loved me for who I was rather than what I could buy them. I had new friendships and old ones rekindled, interests rediscovered and talents explored. I had a life that was truly mine, shaped by my choices rather than someone else's manipulation. As Tommy stirred on the couch and Sarah rubbed her sleepy eyes, I smiled and went to start dinner. Just a simple meal in a small apartment, but surrounded by love that was real, relationships that were honest, and a peace that no amount of money could buy. It was, I realized, exactly the life I'd always wanted. I'd just been too busy trying to buy happiness to notice that it had been within my reach all along.